Here. We're trying out a new format with Square Video. Facebook says Square videos get more engagement. So we're going to find out. I don't know, however, if it will actually stream it square. So we're going to find out, and I suppose I will know in a few moments here. In the meantime, I might be like, if it streams in a regular thing, my head might be like this. I don't know. We'll have to find out. Let's have a little drink together first. Morning coffee. That is good. It's a very red day, you know, red. Anyway, let's talk about primers. The best primers for miniatures. So, when it comes to primers, there's a couple of things you have to consider. The main thing is pigment versus resin. Okay, so a finish is how much resin is in the primer compared to how much pigment is in the primer. So a typical primer with a matte finish, when someone says matte, it means very little, if any, resin, right? If it is a full gloss, it is a whole lot of resin, and the resin adds the sheen to it. So let's jump on in to show off our first primer. Bam. This one is a brown, and this one is the Army Painter brown. I'm going to show the bottle behind it. Ooh, maybe get a better view in a second here. And this is one of the Army Painter color primers. And so that one is the brown. I have the cap here somewhere. And so this one is quite matte, and it has a tiny bit of a satin finish. Not really, though. It's almost entirely matte, especially if you're looking at it compared to other ones. So that is the primary consideration. Now, notice this is a model that I've previously done a little bit of painting on, so it might be a little more textured than normal. But if you look at the slight texturing that's there on the model, that actually allows the paint to catch better while you're painting it. And that's one of the things that they told me was one of the bonuses of the Army Painter thing. So it doesn't have that perfectly smooth finish, because then you can't actually catch the paint as easily. I really like this one a whole lot. The pigment, and basically that is the color that you see on there. This one is a brown and is a darker tone. The lighter the pigment, they have to change the chemical formulations and everything. So if you have a pure white, it tends to be done with titanium dioxide. And titanium dioxide is a large pigment compared to other primers, which is why it's a little more delicate. And we'll talk about priming conditions in a moment here. But this one is a very good, smooth finish that you could easily put on a spritz of a lighter color, or just start painting from there. If you had a brown theme and you put stuff on top of that, you have a warmer tone, which is great. And that is the Army Painter brown right there. The next one is my personal favorite that has been released so far. Let me turn that down here in the settings so you can really get a good look at how wonderful this finish is. There we go. So this one is Gray Sear. That is the Games Workshop gray-white versus the Wraithbone. Wraithbone is very popular, and I'm not sure why it's more popular than Gray Sear. Because if you look at this, it's a little bit on the blue side just because of my current light setup. But if you look at it in regular light, it is absolutely like gray, but with a little bit of hint of white. If you wanted to, and you wanted to get that zenithal effect, which is where you get like a lighter layer on top, you could take an airbrush or a tiny spritz of a pure white if you needed to, and go on top of it. But in order to get that beautiful smooth coverage, you can't always do the pure white. Also, Gray Sear I've used in 100% humidity and a lot of other crazy conditions, like really hot and everything. And I've never had an issue, and I'm saying that as someone who's primed hundreds of models, maybe a couple of thousand at this point, quite a few. This one has probably the best resilience to bad conditions. So especially those of us in Georgia, I'm not currently there, but y'all there with the heat wave and all that and constant humidity, just look at how smooth the finish is on that cape. That is really good. So I highly recommend Gray Sear. If you're a newer painter and you're worried about what your conditions are to paint in, go ahead and get Gray Sear, call it a day. Wraithbone, again, is more popular because it is a whiter, but honestly, I've seen them both painted side by side, and it's basically the same thing. You can get whatever effects you need to by applying Gray Sear first versus Wraithbone. Highly recommend it. And And that one looks like this, behind there. Color, gray sear. Just like that. Highly recommend that one. And then my third model to show you right now is going to be a cheap store brand metallic. And the reason I want to show you this is one that a lot of people get and they say, oh, you know, I'll grab something from either a hobby store or a generic type of primer. This is a generic type of primer, really honestly meant for furniture and stuff like that. So you see here that it has a covering effect for the whole thing. It's very thick and it's okay, I guess. You know, it's not bad. But compared to how smooth the previous two are, I don't recommend going for a regular, you know, you might save a little bit of money, but honestly, I'd rather pay a little more and make sure that my model looks like this compared to that, right? And yes, this is a metallic, and that has different properties to it, so I can't make too much of a comparison there, but I'd rather go with a specialized paint that is designed for miniatures versus a primer that is not, right? And so, yeah, this one here, as you can see, it's just, it covers up in a weird way, all the stuff. It is a nice metallic, I guess, if you're looking at it from eye level, but especially up close and as you start painting, if you're not painting over it, that'd be a little weird. And primers, especially white primers from stores, they really are designed for large surface areas. You know, you're priming on top of a desk, or you're priming a table and stuff like that. So again, I highly recommend going with a specialized primer such as Gray Sear. Pay a little bit of extra money, and I recommend doing that just to save yourself all of the extra heartache, I guess. So I'll show you a little bit, one of my models here for Fallout. And so this is one of the knights from the Brotherhood of Steel. And as you can see here, like that primer is the Gray Sear. And there's a little bit of texture, as there is with any sort of primer. There's always a little bit of texture just because. But honestly, it's super smooth. And if I didn't know any better, I would say that someone just primed it white. And in fact, compared to the resin, this is just slightly lighter. And that's really good. So let's talk about priming conditions. So when you have a model and you want to prime it and get the best results, there's a couple of conditions you have to think about. Number one is temperature. So how cold or how hot is it outside? If it's too cold, it can be difficult because of the way that the spray is hitting the air on the way to the model. It can actually cause issues on the way there. So if your can is cold and then you're spraying it into cold air, it can actually dry up even before it gets to the model. Same thing if it's too humid. If it's way too humid, you get the same effect where the water molecules in the air will meet the paint before, or the primer before it actually gets to the model, cause issues there. That's where you get that gloopiness and the splotchiness from, and then you'll sometimes get the little speckling. So you'll get that from really high humidity, and that's most noticeable the larger the pigment is. So you want to have a nice small pigment, such as Gray Sear, which goes on very, it's actually I think a low amount of pigment for the amount of aerosol that's in there, which is why I think it works so well. So then definitely making sure that your humidity is not too high. I'd say typically for a paint like Army Painters, nothing more than 30 or 40%. For Georgians, that may mean priming in only a certain time of the year or priming in a garage. I don't know. But if you use Gray Sear, you shouldn't have any of those issues, because I primed this night model in 98% humidity, and it was 95 degrees outside. And yes, you can see a little bit of texture, but honestly, you need that, especially with Fallout models. You need to have that texture there, A, so you can paint on top of it, but also it just gives a little bit more life to a model. If it's perfectly smooth, it can be weird sometimes, you know. And some people might want to have that perfect smoothness. Wait for your perfect timing. It's fine. So I recommend getting a specialized paint with a color and or not perfectly white if you are a Georgian and worried about humidity and temperature and looking for a perfect finish, but definitely Gray Sear or a similar spray paint like that. So again, that's the Army Painter Brown, and then the white there is Gray Sear. Bam. If you have any other questions, put in the comments. Put your recommendations. If you have a box that you use, if you have a garage you like to spray in there because it's controlled temperature and humidity, that is great. Just let me know, let other people know, help each other out. If you have any other questions, make sure you check on that. Oh, and the final thing is a reminder, the finish that you have for the primer is going to be how much resin is in there. So a lot of store brands, like stuff you get at Walmart, that stuff will say satin finish, it will say semi-gloss and gloss, and that is the percentage of resin mixed with the pigment. So the higher the resin amount, the more glossy the finish will be. So typically you want a matte finish for models first, and then you can always add your gloss with a hard coat, or if you want to use your finishing spray like Tester's Dull Coat, all that stuff, your choice. But I typically like to recommend a nice matte finish to paint to begin with. Less resin, the better, right? Cool. All right, that's it for me, y'all. Have a fantastic day. Find the perfect primer for you at Gigabytes Cafe. And if you have any questions, ask us at the staff, ask online in the groups, and then make sure you get the perfect primer for your models. Bye, everybody.